Thanksgiving morning. My eldest daughter stood in the kitchen, coffee in hand, and said, "You're too senile to handle real money anymore." By December 2nd, every account had been drained or frozen. My estate, trust, and even the deed to Eleanor's grave plot gone. Just like that. I'm Walter Harrington. I'm 68 years old, a retired Harvard law professor. I've taught constitutional and probate law for over 3 decades. And I never imagined my own daughter would weaponize that knowledge against me. They thought their plan was airtight. They thought age made me some, but they forgot who raised them and what I've survived. If you've ever been blindsided by someone you love, drop your city in the comments and hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear is how I turned the law they used to steal from me into the sword that ended them. Cut to a silver key resting on a leather desk blotter. Cut to a manila envelope labeled medical proxy, active. Cut to a POO document dated October 11th, notarized, her signature, not mine. Looking back now, I see the build-up. It wasn't a single act of betrayal. It was 1,000 little moments that stacked into something monstrous. I spent 40 years building everything. One lecture, one client, one investment at a time. Tenured at 38. Dean by 49. Lectured globally. Never missed a court date. Never missed Eleanor's treatments. Not once. Eleanor was my compass. Diagnosed with autoimmune complications in her 50s. By 60, she couldn't leave the house alone. So I restructured my life. Even when her mind started to go, I stayed by her side. Every appointment, every fight with the insurance company, every night in the hospital. Meanwhile, Rachel, our eldest, was always busy. She called it burnout. I called it avoidance. Eleanor called it growing pains. Evan, her husband, didn't believe in jobs. He believed in tokens. Digital coins, startups with no revenue, 6 years between projects, always selling some new story, always circling my accounts, asking for access, just in case something happens. Walter, you're not getting younger. I didn't bite. Still, when Eleanor passed, I softened. The grief split me in two. Rachel offered to streamline things, handle trust documents, help with the transition. I let her. Because somewhere in my mind, she was still my daughter, still the little girl who wore my oversized coat to trick or treat. What I didn't know was that while I was burying my wife, Rachel and Evan were already making moves. They volunteered to help me go paperless. They changed the home Wi-Fi router. They switched my bank logins for security. They set up auto forwards on my emails. They created a shared family calendar, but I was locked out of editing it. At first, I thought I was just slow. Grief does that. It makes you blurry, forgetful. But grief didn't freeze my investment accounts. Grief didn't reassign my living trust. Grief didn't change the name on Eleanor's foundation. People did that. It started on a Sunday. I got a Chase alert. $27,000 wire to E Prime Holdings, LLC, processed. I hadn't made a transfer in months. I called Chase. They asked, "Was this authorized by your financial proxy?" I paused. "What proxy?" They read back a name, Rachel Harrington, with active POA power of attorney, filed October 11th. I checked my drawer. The POO I had signed for Eleanor years ago was still there. But mine, I'd never signed one. Not for Rachel, not for anyone. And yet, the banks had accepted it. Because the signature looked just real enough. The notary stamp was local. The witnesses, I'd never met them. But one of them, I later discovered, was Evan's college roommate. That night, I opened my Fidelity account. Half the portfolio was gone. Tesla sold. Berkshire liquidated. Municipal bonds transferred to a shell account tied to a family security fund. Eleanor's foundation funds zeroed out. Total loss, $243,780 over 14 months. And that was just the surface. The kicker. They weren't just taking my money. They were building a case that I was slipping mentally, that I wasn't fit to manage my affairs, that I was declining. It started with subtle things. Rachel posted on our HOA Facebook group, "Hey neighbors, if you see my dad wandering or confused, just text me. He forgets we moved some furniture." I hadn't wandered anywhere, but I noticed neighbors giving me strange looks at the mailbox. I asked why we had extra Ring cameras inside the house. Rachel said, "To keep you safe." Dad? Then I found the manila envelope. It was wedged behind the bookshelf, labeled Medical Evaluation, Confidential. The report claimed I had early-stage dementia, signed by a doctor I'd never met, from a clinic I'd never visited. There was even a note in Rachel's handwriting. "This will help when filing the conservatorship." And that's when I knew they weren't waiting for me to decline. They were manufacturing it. The day I found that forged medical file, something in me shifted. I sat there in my study, envelope open on my lap, staring at those words, early-stage neurodegeneration. Recommend memory care transition within 6 months. I knew it was fake. The clinic listed didn't exist in the state medical registry. The physician's license number was off by 1 digit, but it looked official enough for a bank, for a judge, for anyone who didn't know better. And that was the point. I called Rachel. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I simply said, I found a medical file. It's interesting reading. She paused, then laughed. Dad, you don't even remember going to the appointment. That kind of proves the diagnosis, doesn't it? That line didn't just chill me, it burned. I hung up. That night, I went into the attic, opened the old fireproof lockbox I hadn't touched in years. Inside, Eleanor's original will, our handwritten trust revisions, the notarized title to the house, all signed by me with the real signature, the one I'd practiced for decades of court filings. And the moment I compared it to the POO Rachel filed, I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a coup. I called our family attorney, the one who helped Eleanor and me revise the trust the year before she passed. He sounded hesitant. Off? Walter. We spoke in October. You asked me to stand down and let Rachel manage the estate. I didn't. I had no memory of that call because it never happened, but he had the call logs, the voice recordings. They'd used AI to mimic my voice, spliced from voicemail samples, just enough to sound like me authorizing the handover. They played it back, and my stomach dropped. It was my voice, but not my words. That same day, I got a voicemail from my fidelity advisor, Walter, just confirming your request to diversify out of blue chips into liquid instruments for Rachel's upcoming move. Rachel's move. She was putting my money into liquid instruments because she was moving to Dubai for 6 months to launch a family wellness startup, funded, apparently, by my retirement. I tried logging into my Fidelity dashboard again. Locked. Account flagged for assisted guardianship control. I checked the deed to my home online, transferred to Family Protective Holdings, LLC, a shell company registered in Evan's name. Even Eleanor's burial lot reassigned. And when I contacted the county recorder's office to file a complaint, they said, "Sir, based on your file, your daughter is the acting medical proxy. If there's a concern, she'll need to initiate next steps." I asked what my file said. They emailed me a redacted version of the mental capacity affidavit Rachel had submitted. At the top, Walter Harrington. Declining executive function. Cites. Paranoia. Fixation on control. Increasing confusion. They were building a narrative that I was losing touch with reality, while they stole every piece of it. That night, I watched the security footage from my Ring cam footage they'd forgotten I still had access to. A few weeks prior, while I was at the doctor, Rachel walked in with a folder. She sat at my desk, signed my name, over and over, practicing. That's when the dots connected. They didn't just forge one document. They'd been laying groundwork for over a year. The fake notary, the fabricated clinic, the AI voice call, even small things like posting on the HOA group that I forget my car keys in the fridge. None of it was accidental. They were seeding a digital trail of senility, while they rewrote my legal identity behind my back. But here's the thing. They forgot. I wrote the policy manual for our elder guardianship fraud in 3 states. And I kept a full analog record of everything hard copies, notarized, time-stamped, and just like that, their fake world, it started to crack. The moment I saw Rachel practicing my signature on the ring footage, something in me snapped. Not in anger, no, in clarity. For months, I'd felt like I was drifting, unraveling. But now I knew I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. They were just that careful, and it was all starting to collapse. I went room to room, pulling files, receipts, handwritten notes from Eleanor, anything with my real signature. I laid them all out on the dining table, every bank document, trust agreement, and title we'd signed together over 30 years. Then I pulled up the forged POA again, the one Rachel filed. There it was, a tail on the H that I've never written in my life. I wrote thousands of court filings during my career. My signature's been cross-examined more times than I can count. They got close, but not close enough. And it wasn't just the POA. I found 4 more forged signatures. One on a grant disbursement form from Eleanor's foundation. One on a fidelity transfer request. 2 on digital documents they never thought I'd find printed. I stayed up until 3 a.m., creating what I later called the evidence tree. At the top, Walter Harrington. Estate compromised. Then branches. Medical fraud. Financial misappropriation. Identity forgery. Property reassignment. Under each one, dates, screenshots, video stills. Each act of betrayal stacked neatly like a criminal indictment. Eleanor used to say, "If they're going to come for you, make sure they trip over your paper trail." She was right, and I had it all. But this wasn't just theft. This was a conspiracy, a coordinated, multi-layered takedown designed to leave me legally voiceless. Rachel and Evan weren't just after my money. They were after my autonomy, my history, my dignity. The timeline started to come into focus. Month 1. Rachel asks to digitize my financial records. Month 3. Evan accidentally resets my banking passwords. Month 5. New LLC appears, registered under his name. Month 8. Home Wi-Fi router replaced with a mesh system. I lose access. Month 10 POA filed. Medical report submitted. Month 13. Liquidation of assets. Voice-spliced calls. Month 4 ring cameras. HOA complaints. And whispers of decline. It was precise. Layered. smart. But they made one fatal mistake. They underestimated a man who spent his life teaching others how these scams work. I started backing everything up offline. Hard drives, print copies, voice memos recorded as affidavits. I contacted an old colleague, Janet Simmons, now a forensic handwriting analyst for the state. We hadn't spoken in years, but the second she heard what I had, she said, "You've got them dead to rights." Walter, but this can't just be about being right. This has to be airtight. She offered to review every signature, match every fake with a verified original, create a forensic report admissible in court. And I wasn't done. The next morning, I contacted a former student, now a partner, at a firm that specializes in elder law and fiduciary fraud. When he heard my name, he paused. "Professor Harrington, are you all right?" I told him everything, quietly, clearly. No dramatics, just facts. He said, "Walter, with what you're describing, we're not just talking civil litigation. This could involve criminal fraud, medical impersonation, elder abuse statutes, and conservatorship tampering. You're not just a victim here. You're Exhibit A." That's when I realized they hadn't just stolen my money. They'd stolen my voice. They tried to erase my credibility, to make it so no one would believe me when I said, "That signature isn't mine. That diagnosis isn't real. That money wasn't gifted. It was taken." And once someone takes your credibility, your history, your memory, you don't just lose control, you lose your story. That was the moment I stopped grieving and started planning. Not revenge, restoration. Because what they didn't know was I'd already moved half my records to a secure location Eleanor and I prepared years ago. And I had one more trick. In my will, updated 6 months before all this began, I'd embedded a conditional clause. If anyone tried to legally incapacitate me without due process, the entire estate would be frozen and reviewed under a third-party trust audit triggered automatically. Guess who never read the fine print? The day after my call with the lawyer, everything began to move. Not in chaos, never chaos. Not for me. If Rachel and Evan built a web, I would be the one to light the match. I made 3 calls that morning. First, to Janet, the forensic handwriting expert. Second, to the elder law firm. Third, to my old IT consultant, someone I'd mentored at Harvard, who owed me more than a few favors. Within 48 hours, my house felt less like a crime scene and more like a command center. Janet delivered her findings, nearly a dozen forged signatures, each one with a tell. The slant, the pressure, the inconsistent loops on my capital W. She included a line in her report I'll never forget. These signatures would not pass the scrutiny of a first-year law student, let alone a judge. Meanwhile, my former student at the law firm was building a case. He asked for every document, every email, every printout, nothing digital that could be tampered with. He wanted original envelopes, postmarks, time-stamped photos of every page. I boxed everything, drove it across town, handed it over in person. As I set the box down, he looked at me and said, "This is a systematic operation." Walter, they made it big. That makes them vulnerable. And he was right. The bigger the theft, the bigger the footprint. I turned my attention to the Ring cameras. I still had admin access, something Evan had missed, too sure of himself to check the recovery email. In the archives, I found hours of footage, Rachel carrying armfuls of papers, practicing signatures in my office, Evan making late-night calls, pacing the backyard, reading off what sounded like passwords. Even better, there were clips of them discussing me, confident, careless, certain I was asleep. They rehearsed their narrative out loud. "Dad's not the same. You know, if anyone asks, just say you saw him wandering again." I clipped every moment, labeled every file, created a master timeline matching the signatures, the transfers, the clinic appointments. And there was more. My IT consultant recovered email logs showing that Rachel had forwarded my legal correspondence to her private server, using Eleanor's old contacts to intercept communications with my bank. It was all right there. Date stamped. Metadata intact. That week, the lawyer filed 3 injunctions. 1 to freeze the trust. 1 to halt any further transfers from my accounts. And 1 to demand a full forensic audit of all activity since Eleanor's passing. The court responded fast. With the evidence in hand, a temporary freeze was issued the same afternoon. Rachel tried to call. She left 3 voicemails, her tone swinging wildly between false sweetness and veiled threats. Evan sent a text, "You're making this hard on yourself." Walter, maybe it's time you accepted help. I didn't respond. I just saved the texts and sent them to my attorney. Next, we delivered the notarized report from Janet, the Ring footage, the email logs, and every physical document to the judge assigned to the case. No shouting, no drama, just a stack of facts that spoke for themselves. But the moment that told me the tide had truly turned. It was when my lawyer called with the judge's words, almost laughing with disbelief. It's not often you see an elder abuse case so meticulously documented. This is the kind of evidence that makes a judge angry. With the court's order, Rachel and Evan lost all access, their shell companies flagged, their travel plans interrupted. Rachel tried to go on social media, spinning her own version. But by then, My lawyer had already alerted the HOA, the bank, the university, and most importantly, the local press. Suddenly, the story wasn't Walter's losing it. It was esteemed Professor Outsmart's family fraud court orders, full audit. Their friends stopped answering. Their wellness startup was dropped by investors within 48 hours. Neighbors who'd looked at me with pity now stopped me to say, "I had no idea what you were going through." I nodded, thanked them, kept moving. I wasn't done. Justice was just getting started. The courthouse on hearing day felt colder than I remembered. I wore Eleanor's favorite tie, the one she said made me look unstoppable. Walking through security, I caught a glimpse of myself in the glass, older. Yes, but not beaten. Rachel and Evan sat with their lawyer across the aisle, eyes locked on their phones. They didn't look at me. They barely spoke to each other. My legal team rolled in boxes of evidence. Janet's forensic report, Ring video files, notarized trust documents, email logs. We had everything organized, color-coded, paginated, just like I'd taught my students to do. The judge called us to order. He didn't waste time. He started by reading the charges: elder financial abuse, identity fraud, medical impersonation, property misappropriation. He looked at Rachel, then at Evan, and then at me. He asked me to stand and state, in my own words, what had been taken. I didn't list the money. I didn't list the house or the accounts. I said, "Your Honor, what they stole was my voice, my autonomy, my right to choose the rest of my own life." The courtroom went silent. Even Rachel's lawyer stopped taking notes. Then my attorney laid out the timeline, the fake POA, the doctored medical report, the forged signatures, each one matched, point by point, to Janet's analysis, the AI-voiced phone calls to the bank, the transfers to LLCs, the Ring camera footage. Piece by piece, it was undeniable. When Rachel finally took the stand, she tried to explain. She called it intervening for my father's well-being. She claimed I was paranoid and confused, that she was just protecting the family legacy. But the judge stopped her cold. He held up Janet's report. He asked her to sign her name on a piece of paper. Right there. Rachel's hand shook. Her signature didn't match any of the ones on the POA, on the medical forms, or on the transfers. Evan tried to shift blame, suggesting he'd trusted Rachel to handle everything, but the emails and text messages told a different story. His name was on the shell company, his phone number on the wire instructions. The judge looked at them for a long time. He said, "You didn't just break the law. You tried to erase your father's existence. That's something this court takes personally." With a single order, he froze every account tied to the fraudulent transfers. He placed a lien on the LLCs and issued a directive to reverse all property assignments. He referred the case to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. Then, for the final blow, he ordered Rachel and Evan to perform 1 year of community service in the county hospital's elder care unit. Manual labor. No phones. No shortcuts. I walked out of that courthouse lighter than I'd felt in years. Outside, the press was waiting. My attorney gave a careful statement. I declined interviews, but I made one point for the record. If someone tells you that age makes you vulnerable, remember that experience is its own form of armor. I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor. Word spread quickly. The HOA posted a message clarifying the situation and apologizing for spreading false rumors. Rachel's wellness startup was dropped by its last investor. Evan's name was scrubbed from every tech project he'd tried to join. Neighbors, who once looked at me with suspicion, now knocked on my door to offer support. Some even asked if I'd consider teaching a seminar on elder law defense. But I didn't feel victorious. Not really. I felt something deeper relief. Yes, but also a sober sense of how fragile safety can be, even for those who think they know every rule. I went home, made tea, and sat in Eleanor's old reading chair. I thought about everything we'd built and how close it came to being stolen by those who should have guarded it most. But I also knew the story wasn't over. Not for me, and not for anyone who's ever been betrayed by their own blood. After the verdict, Rachel reached out. She called twice, then sent a long email, half apology, half justification. She wanted to rebuild trust, to move forward as a family. I read her words, felt a flicker of old pain, and set the phone down. I chose not to answer, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Evan never contacted me. The last I heard, he'd started his community service, cleaning floors for men and women who'd seen more life than he ever would. The house felt quieter, lighter. There were new locks on the doors, and my attorney checked in weekly. But mostly, peace returned. Neighbors waved again. The university invited me to guest lecture on elder protection law. The world kept turning. But now, I was back at the helm. I'd learned that sometimes. Dignity means closing the door and never looking back. 6 months later, life feels different and better. I guest lecture once a week at the university, teaching students how to spot elder fraud. My circle is smaller now, filled with colleagues, neighbors, and a few loyal friends who showed up when it mattered most. Rachel and Evan are gone from my life, and I don't regret it. I've learned that family isn't just blood. It's the people who honor your boundaries, respect your story, and stand by you in the storm. Some evenings, I sit in Eleanor's old chair, sipping tea, listening to the quiet. I see the scars left behind, but I also see the strength I gained reclaiming my life. If you're watching this, remember, boundaries aren't walls. They're doors you choose who to open for. Would you have pressed charges against your own family? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story resonated, subscribe for more. Peace, at last, is knowing I chose the ending.